So good morning, and thank you very much for attending our webinar today on June 2012 new SVHCs. I see some questions have come in. From what I can see, I think I'll be answering those along the way, and if not, I can definitely, I will be dealing with those either at the end of the session or via our FAQ or via email after the session if this goes past, much past the 11 o'clock mark. I'm getting some input that people have lost the audio access. So in using the telephone, you dial 1-778-783-0791, and the access code is 339-229-229. All right, so everyone should be available. There we go. Let's get started. So the first few slides are just our introductory slides. So again, today we're covering the REACH June 2012 SVHCs. My name is Crystal Noseworthy-Baker. You can see my phone number, my contact via email, our general email, our website, and our general telephone for Ascent compliance. So a quick introduction to us. We deal in consulting, IT, and of course basically a combination of those two things, operations, helping with program implementation and data management for all of your compliance needs. Today, as I've mentioned, we're going to look at the latest additions to the SVHC candidate list, look into the industries affected by these newest SVHCs, review the requirements that come from SVHCs. We're also going to look at the registry of intentions. As part of looking at the requirements for SVHCs, we're actually going to take a peek through the authorization list as well, and then we'll do a quick review of our consulting and software services at Ascent. Now, the first section of this presentation, and actually a few times throughout the presentation when we look at the authorization list, and then again when we look at the registry of intentions list, there are large tables. And these tables include all of the available information on uses. This information was found on the ECHA website through the dossiers, as well as reputable sources on the internet. If you have any questions about these uses or any issues with these uses, please don't hesitate to contact us. We definitely appreciate extra input. I'm not going to go through every single use of every single SVHC because, of course, then we would be here forever. Everyone is going to be able to access both the slide deck and a recording of the webinar. These are going to be available on our website on the webinar page. So let's get started here. So our first SVHC that's been added is 1,2-bis-2-methoxyethoxyethane, or TEG-DME, or triglyme. This is an inert solvent. It's possibly used as a catalyst as well. It's reported to be used in the formulation of electrolyte systems for lithium batteries. It's also reported to be used in brake fluids. Then we've got a very closely related substance, the EG-DME, and we see this use restricted generally to industrial and professional users. Again, it's an inert special solvent. It's used in various processes, industrial reaction solvents, cleaning solvents. There is one confirmed use in a consumer product as an electrolyte, again, solvent in lithium-ion batteries. And then we've also seen uses as a constituent, within flexograver water solvent-based inks, lithographic plate developers, and glass cleaning solvents. On the newest additions, in the newest additions list, the 13 additions, we've actually got quite a few colorants, dyes. There's a large section of them. So we'll start with the solvent violent 8, 4,4-bis-dimethylamino-4-methylamino-trityl alcohol. We've got our CAS and REC number throughout the table. You can always access it at that point. Of course, this is used in inks and dyes. It's a colorant, largely for the formulation and production of writing inks. That's really the easiest summary of all of these uses. There are various literature references to uses in diagnostic, analytical, and R&D applications, as well as biological stain. Overall, though, essentially, it's seen as a dye for a variety of materials. Mitchell's ketone and Mitchell's base have also been added to the SVHC list, and this is this is an important intermediate, again, in the manufacture of dyes, and in this particular case, triphenylmethane dyes. So we actually see it in the production of many color-indexed colorants: CI acid blue 34, 88, acid violet 38, 2B, basic orange, basic yellow, blue, solvent violet, solvent yellow, brown, purple, basic blue 26. So we see that whole list there. We also have some references that exist on the use as an intermediate in the manufacture of pharmaceuticals. It's also used as an additive in dyes and pigments, acting as a photosensitizer. It's used as a curing agent. There's other further reports in literature as a use as a light absorbent, as well in photoresist formulations. It's also mentioned to be used as a component in dry film products. There's some analytical applications used in repackaging and in research and development. Overall, this is a coloring agent, and we see it used in a variety of industries. Then we have our dyes. So we've got our CI Basic Violet 3 and then a CI Basic Blue 26. So again, we've got dye stuff, uses in carbon paper, staining of dried flowers as a marker, some uses in microbial and clinical laboratories. Then for Basic Blue 26, we've got inks, dyes, paints, pigments. We see R&D applications, diagnostic, analytical, production of various inks. We even see Basic Blue 26, in cleaners, ink in the printing industry, fairly easy dyeing of various paper and plastic products. Again, I am going through these uses quickly, and we're going to review essentially overall the industries that will be impacted by these, and everyone will have access to the slide deck as well as the recording, so you can read and see all of these uses in more detail. Diboron trioxide. Now this is one that doesn't fall necessarily under the dye stuffs and the basic blue and the Mitchell's ketone or base, but we do see that it is used in inks and paints, but it's used in a variety of industries. So we've got glass production, fritz production, refractories, flame retardants, there's nuclear applications as a catalyst, reagent chemicals, agriculture, construction, adhesives, crystal growth. So there's a variety of industries impacted by the use of diboron trioxide. Formamide. Now, this particular substance is not registered for consumer use. However, it has been measured in wooden toys, foam puzzle mats, as well as in fitness and exercise mats. So although it's not registered in REACH for consumer use, it has been found in those products, which obviously are very common consumer products. Formamide is used as a solvent and plasticizer in these products. It can be an ingredient as a softener for paper, animal glues, water-soluble glues, and wood stains. Lead-2, bis-methane sulfonate. These are used in plating. That is really its only use. That's where it's found. Solutions of this are used in plating. We see it in tin lead plating. Now, Mitchell's base, as we mentioned earlier, as we covered earlier, there was Mitchell's ketone, but now we're looking at Mitchell's base, also used as a chemical intermediate in the manufacture of dyes and pigments, and we've got those few of those listed there. It's also used as a chemical intermediate in the manufacture of hydrochloric salt, used in R&D, used as a coloring agent in the production of paper and paper products. So again, we're seeing just various uses dealing with inks, paints, dye stuff. Now we've got TGIC, and this is an epoxy compound, and primarily we're seeing it used as a hardener in resins and coatings. One of the main uses in polyester powder coatings for metal finishing, and these coatings are typically contain between 4 and 10% TGIC. We'll cover this in more detail, but a quick reminder of the SVHC limit of 0.1%. If your coating is looking at 4 and 10%, then it's very possible that the 0.1% weight by weight will be met in having TGIC in the coating. It's also mentioned as being used in inks in the printed circuit board industry. So PCB, obviously a huge impact in consumer products and really around the world in electronics. So the PCB industry can definitely be affected by this being added to the SVHC list. Now we've got CI solvent blue 4. So again, inks and dyes. It's being used for dyeing a variety of materials: paper, distemper, wood, lacquers, feathers, plastic. There's also reports of it being used extensively in fertilizers. There's some cosmetics, some diagnostic, analytical, R&D applications. So this is a recurring theme for any of those colorants. Then we've got the beta TGIC, and again, these uses are all related, so we're covering both the TGIC and the beta TGIC. Again, an epoxy compound used as a hardener in resins, mainly used in the polyester powder coatings. Printed circuit board industry, again, is impacted by this addition. Now, the next few slides, we're basically going to summarize really the industries affected. We've got that large list of all the reported uses or uses found in literature, and now we're basically summarizing which industries are impacted by these SVHCs. And I've also attempted to group them, as they are related, and allow for an easier sort of dissemination and understanding of the additions. So first, there's the TEGDME and EGDME. So we're looking at the battery industry, automotive industry, cleaning industry, microelectronics industry, so in the solders, and then the printing industry. Diboron trioxide, as I mentioned earlier, various uses, diverse industry impact. We're looking at glass, refractories, metallurgy, flame retardants, nuclear, polymer, detergent and cleaners, inks and paints, semiconductor, agriculture, construction materials, adhesives, which of course have a multi-industry impact. So diboron trioxide, of these latest additions, these 13 new additions, this would be the most wide-ranging. Of course, colorants are used in various industries as well. So I don't know if anyone's really safe with these additions of SVHCs. We're looking at a fairly wide range of impact overall for the 13 added. Formamide, as mentioned, it's not registered, but it's definitely been found in the toy and consumer industry. We're also looking at glue manufacturers and wood article manufacturers. Lid 2 bis methane sulfonate, very specific, the most specific. We're looking at the electronics industry, tin, lead plating. TGIC and beta TGIC, we just covered those, but we're looking at the hardener in resins and coatings. So we look at the automotive industry, electronics, appliances, silkscreen printing, adhesives, printed circuit board, and the plastic industry. Now I've sort of grouped all of the colorants or dyes together, any of the color index substances, and really a huge summary: inks, dyes, paints, pigments. We're looking at paper and paper products, packaging, wood, fibers, and textiles. Of course, we saw numerous times that it came back again and again in diagnostic, analytical, and then R&D applications. There's possible cosmetics use. We've got cleaners, coating application, dyes in wood, lacquers, plastics, leathers, used in fuel and used in fertilizers. Michler's ketone and Michler's base, again, dyes and pigments industry, right? A coloring agent in paper and paper products. Again, the analytical reagent, diagnostic reagent, and then R&D applications. But as well, there was some polymer production impact and pharmaceuticals impact for the Michler's ketone and the Michler's base. So let's look at the requirements. We're going to go through communication, notification, and then authorization. And as part of authorization, we're going to take a look at the current authorization list as well. So really, what do new SVHCs mean for your company? Companies will need to assess whether they have legal obligations resulting from the inclusion of the new substances in the candidate list. The legal obligations related to SVHCs include communication and notification. They can also include authorization, but that's when the SVHCs move from that SVHC candidate list to authorization. I'm going to cover that, of course, in a little bit more detail. If you have any questions on really that, going from communication, notification, authorization, after all of this information, it is a lot to take in. If you've seen this before, hopefully this is a good review. If you haven't seen this before and there's some holes or you're really missing some steps or not quite comprehending, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll be glad to provide some further information and some step-by-step instructions as well. We can look at that. So communication. Any producers or importers of articles placed on the market in the EU must declare the presence of any of these substances in an article in a concentration exceeding 0.1% weight by weight. Now, Article 33 of the REACH regulation is the source of this compliance requirement, and it's the duty to communicate information on substances and articles. So this is directly from the REACH regulation. I always like to include the regulatory wording so that everyone has that basis and then can take that and understand the interpretation and what that means on a practical level. Very simply put, this means that once a substance has been added to the SVHC list, you must declare its presence to your downstream users if the concentration is above 0.1% of your product's weight. This is to be done immediately for professional customers and then within 45 days from a request from consumers. Now, the next legal impact of SVHCs being added, the next requirement under REACH, notification. So the next step is that the same producers and importers that had the communication responsibility have 6 months from the date the new SVHCs were included. So they were included on the 18th of June 2012, and they must notify the ECHA if, now both of these requirements must be met, both of these criteria. The SVHC is present in those articles in quantities totaling over 1 ton per producer or importer per year. So it's not the product that the SVHC is in, it's actually the total of the SVHC that must meet that 1 ton per producer or importer per year. And, of course, that original requirement that the SVHC is present in those articles above a concentration of 0.1% weight by weight. Both those criteria must be met for notification to come into play. Some quick notes on notification. It's created using the same software as a REACH registration, Euclid. And then it's also submitted using the same tool, the REACH IT tool. It's a much less intense dossier than a registration dossier. To facilitate the task of notification, the ECHA has actually made available pre-filled substance data sets in the Euclid format. They've actually moved up to the Euclid 5.4 format at this point, and I believe all of those data sets will be easily convertible. Each candidate list substance has its own pre-filled data set, so that can be downloaded from the candidate list webpage. Then you can fill in. Just because it's pre-filled, that means actually for the substance information, but for the specific information for your company and your substance identity, you must still complete those. But it's nice to have the start for the classification section, and some of the substance information is completed. So these data sets contain the identity and then the classification and labeling of the substance. The following information must be entered by the notifier. So you get these pre-filled data sets, but there is information that will still need to be completed if notification comes into play. That's identity and contact details, registration number if it's available, the tonnage range, and a brief description of the uses of the substance in the article itself and the uses of the article. REACH IT, as I mentioned, is that submission tool. So we're still looking at Euclid, and we're looking at REACH IT for notification. Like I said, it's essentially a less intense, less time-consuming dossier than registration. The next requirement, so what do new SVHCs mean for your company? Again, we're looking now at authorization. So any chemicals placed on the candidate list can also eventually be approved for an authorization list, where they will then be banned from use unless an authorization is submitted and approved before the applicable sunset date. Most, if not all, of the substances on the current SVHC list will eventually move onto this authorization list and therefore require an authorization for their use. Authorizations are required on a per substance, per use, per supply chain basis. You or an actor of your supply chain must have been granted an authorization. So this is a basic review of the authorization process. So we get the registry of intentions. So this is submitted by the member states, and they are essentially registering their intention to submit a dossier. Currently, there are 22 registered. 13 of those dossiers are expected to be submitted in August 2012. 4 are expected to be submitted in January 2013. And 5 have been on this registry of intentions for an extensive period of time, and there's no expected date of submission. So these are intended to be submitted as for the SVHC candidate list, but those last 5, there's been no submission to this point, and they've been on that list for a significant period of time. So we're really looking at the 13 expected to be submitted in August 2012, and then 4 expected to be submitted in January 2013. The submission of the Annex 15 dossier, the SVHC dossier, to the ECHA for the compliance check. So this is done by the member state. And then you look at the publication of that dossier. So once it's passed the compliance check, it is published. And then there's a commenting period. After the commenting period is completed, it is then added to the candidate list, depending on, of course, those comments. And that's when the Article 33 requirements, the communication requirements kick in. 6 months from then, the notification requirements kick in. So this is where the latest 13 are added. Then we've got the prioritization list, and that's order in which the substances are going to be reviewed to be added to the authorization list. And then you get to that authorization list where the restrictions and authorizations are handed out. An authorization will contain the following information. So when it's posted on the ECHA website, for example, it's going to have the substance identity, the intrinsic properties of very high concern of that substance, the sunset date, which is the date by when a substance can no more be used without authorization, the application date, which is the date before which an application for authorization for each use that is not exempted from the authorization requirement must be made in order to continue to use the substance for the specific use. So not only do they give the sunset date, but they give you the deadline that you have to submit the application for authorization. Then there's the review period for uses if appropriate, so any exempted uses or categories of uses that apply. Now, the current authorization list. So I've got this listed, and I've got some basic uses. So we're looking at phthalates, dibutyl phthalate, benzyl butyl phthalate, bis-2-ethyl hexyl phthalate. So we've got DBP, BBP, DHP, MDAs on there, diarsenic pentaoxide and trioxide, musk-xylene, HBCDD. The expected date of submission I included there. And that's how long, that was the initial SVHC list. That's what we were looking at. So these were actually first dealt with back in 2008. They moved from the SVHC list, and now we're on the authorization list. There's the C numbers and CAS numbers that apply, and we've got the uses and industries. Obviously, any of the plasticizers have a huge impact. HBCDD as a flame retardant also has a fairly large impact in terms of industries, and then MDA is a hardener for epoxy resins. So again, we're looking at PCBs, a hardener and adhesives, intermediate in the manufacture of high-performance polymers, and preparation of polyurethane. This is the rest of the authorization list. So the more, you can see the expected date of submission there. That's again from the SVHC. So these are the more recent additions to the authorization list. We've got 2,4-DNT, another phthalate, lead chromate, some colorants there with the CI pigment red 104 and yellow 34. And then TCEP, and again, I've also included the uses and industries here. So now we're going to take a look at some SVHC declaration examples and what those should look like, and I'm going to spend some time sort of pointing out any issues so that you can get a better understanding of what's out there and what you should be looking at, not only for collecting declarations, but perhaps in creating your declarations. So all of these declarations are available on the internet. They're publicly available. There's no information on them that are confidential. This declaration in particular from American Zettler. So there's a few things to point out here when you're looking at a declaration. You're looking at ensuring that it's official looking, essentially. You're looking for a date, you're looking for a letterhead, you're looking for a signature of of a logical or sort of applicable individual. So in this case, it's an engineering manager. That makes sense. If you were looking at, say, an administrative assistant, that might be less worthy, especially if it's not on letterhead, if it's simply an email response. You want something as official as possible, saying that this company is actually declaring their REACH status. We've got the subject, we've got a reference to the REACH regulation under, Regulation EC 1907-2006. It mentions SVHCs. It talks about when substances were added. In this scenario, this is an older declaration, so it would not actually be the most current. It's only up to the December 15th, 2010 list. So we're actually looking, there's been additions in 2011 as well as now 2012. So we're actually at 84 substances, and this is back from the 53 substances. But in terms of format, it's got a lot of the elements. It's just not to the most recent SVHC list. Here, again, we've got the company header. We've got an appropriate individual. I mean, it's the executive vice president. It's got, before this June 18th list, it was the most current date. You can see that it's December 19th, 2011, but now, of course, we've had this June edition, so it was current. However, when you look at the wording in this declaration, we see an inaccurate understanding of the REACH responsibilities. That it's actually talking about the articles being exempt unless they release an SVHC. Well, that's not the case at all. Release of SVHCs or release of substances, that's dealing with registration. It's simply the presence of SVHCs that has that communication concern, and then the presence of SVHCs possibly dealing with notifications as well. There's no exemption dealing with the REACH SVHCs dealing with release. That does not apply here. So this is definitely something that would require some feedback in order to get a proper declaration from the company. So again, Momentive, this is from January 16th. So as of January 16th and the December list, it was definitely a current declaration. Of course, with this newest edition, it is not current at this time, and I know companies are all working to declare to the latest list. But before this latest, before June 18th, this was an appropriate declaration. It's got the proper date. It's referring to the REACH list as of December 19th. It's got the substances of very high concern. It talks about the REACH legislation or regulation. It's got a header. It's got a REACH customer support engineer, so an appropriate signature. So this is, once this is updated to the most recent list, this is definitely an appropriate declaration. So looking at what's coming in SVHCs, and it must be understood that the SVHC candidate list is a moving target. It's a live animal. And there was a previous commitment to have 136 SVHCs by the end of 2012, and this was communicated back in March 2010. But this was just a stated commitment. It was non-binding and has since come to light that this is unattainable. Budgetary reasons, member states are not able to submit the dossiers that are required at the rate that are required, and then the ECHA is also not able to review those dossiers and get the SVHCs up in time. So the new target of the European Commission was to have 15 substances added to the candidate list by the end of 2012. Well, they've just added 13. There were also 4 that were consolidated down to 2. If any of you are familiar with the SVHC list, this was dealing with RCF, refractory ceramic fibers. There was actually 2 separate entries of 2. So we had the zirconia and the aluminosilicate refractory ceramic fibers. There were 4 entries for that. The initial 2, and then there were 2 most recently added in December, and that was to try to encompass and be more clear on what was included in those, because it's related to ceramic fiber size and a few other characteristics of a given ceramic fiber. And so what ended up happening was now it's been consolidated down to 2. So we had 73, and then we added 13, which would bring it up to 86, but 4 were consolidated down to 2, so the current total is 84. A few others are definitely expected in August. Of course, with that registry of intentions, we've got another 13 that are registered and expected to be, the dossier is expected to be submitted in August. So they've been normally adding SVHCs in June and December, so whether they're going to add some in August or just move ahead to that December deadline again, with 13 dossiers being expected to be added in August, there's a possibility that the SVHC number is going to be 97 by the end of this year. Now the Registry of Intentions. So we're currently sitting at 2:41. We've got about 20 minutes, and we've got a few slides left. Again, we've got a large list of what the current Registry of Intentions and their uses are, so I'll go through those and hopefully be able to hit a couple questions as well and still end right at the 11 o'clock timeline. So as I previously mentioned, there are 22 substances registered in this Registry of Intentions. So they've been registered for a dossier to be submitted, for them then to have the commenting period, and then be added to the SVHC list. So we've got PFOA, or perfluorooctanoic acid. And this is one of those expected date of submissions for January 2013, actually. And we've got numerous uses listed here. So we're looking, it's a man-made fluorosurfactant and a global pollutant, which is why it's been registered as an intention as an SVHC. PFOS, which is related to PFOA, as a key ingredient in Scotchgard, and numerous stain repellents. So there's that impact, as well as an impregnation agent for textiles, paper, leather, wax, polishes, paints, varnishes, cleaning products, and then also some impact in the semiconductor industry. Again, everyone's going to be able to access this webinar, the slide deck, as well as the recording, on our website in the webinar section. So all of these lists will be available. APFO, so this is a derivative of the PFAO, so the previous substance that was registered. And again, we're looking at a lot of the same uses and impact here. Then we've got a couple of phthalates. We've got the diisopentyl phthalate and the di-N-pentyl phthalate. So essentially we're looking at the trend of essentially eliminating the use of phthalates as much as possible, or putting them on restricted substances lists, particularly the SVHC list, attempting to get as many, if not all, phthalates on this list. That seems to be the trend. Phthalates are getting added essentially every update, and they're moving through the system right up to authorization. And so phthalates being used in those plastics, there's definitely going to be put a lot of research and time into eliminating phthalates from plastics and getting viable, safe, ecologically conscientious and responsible solutions to the predominant use of phthalates. Now we come upon 4 of the 5 that do not have the expected date of submission, and we're looking at coal tar distillates and coal tar residues. And these have basically been sitting in the Registry of Intentions since 2008, and we haven't seen a submission of a dossier. But we're looking at polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons here, PAHs, a term that some of you may have heard of, and this is looking at the fuel industry, essentially. Further arsenic compounds, again, this is the notification of intention from 2008. There's no expected date of submission, but again, I have listed arsenic compounds and their uses. Then we've got hexahydromethyl phthalic anhydride and a few of its related substances. Phthalic anhydride is mainly used as a hardener for epoxy resins, and as an intermediate for plasticizers, specialty resins, insect repellents, and rust inhibitors. So for the CAS number 255050510, it's known as MHHPA. Then there's also 4-MHHPA, and really we're looking at those curing agents and hardeners for epoxy resins, and various impacts, electric and electronics field, and semiconductors seems to be the largest impact. But we've also seen some use as an insecticide, plasticizer, and then anti-rust agent. Cyclohexane 1,2-dicarboxylic anhydride, so HHPA related. So again, we're looking at coatings, epoxy resins, solidifying agents, polyester resins, adhesives, and plasticizing agents. Then we're looking at heptacosafluorotetradecanoic acid, known also as perfluorotetradecanoic acid. So the chemical class, we're going to see a few here. These fall under the PSC or perfluorochemical chemical class. So PSCs, we've definitely heard of these. They're industrial chemicals used in water, stain, and grease repellents, be it food wrap, carpet, furniture, clothing. So Scotchgard and Teflon, again, these are substances used in those, so related to the PFOA and APFO again. The pentacosafluorotridecanoic acid, so again, the PFC chemical class. The henicosafluoroundecanoic acid, PFUNA, again, the PFC chemical class. These are all related. Another one, tricosafluorododecanoic acid, again with the PFC chemical class. There's a number of trade and product names associated with this, and I've included those here. So, but again, we're looking at PFCs being included in the Registry of Intentions and therefore eventually in the SVHC candidate list. Now, cadmium is obviously a huge one. And cadmium and its compounds are already restricted under Annex 17 as a colorant, and that annex has been brought over from a previous restrictions regulation, and it was brought under the umbrella of REACH. And I will cover those specific instances. I've included some extra information in the slides around cadmium, but it obviously has many industrial uses and was used in electroplating. It's present in cadmium pigments, coatings, as well as battery production. So I've included some extra information here on uses of cadmium. One of the bigger ones, or one of the ones that will catch some attention, is in PVC. Cadmium was used as heat, light, and a weathering stabilizer. But they have been, those stabilizers have been completely replaced. So hopefully, in the newer, SVHCs, from what we understand, they've been replaced, so cadmium shouldn't be present in PVC. In addition to cadmium, there's all the cadmium sulfide, a few cadmium-related substances. So sulfide, oxide, and again, I've included, we're looking at colorants here, and then plating for baths, electrodes for storage, cadmium salts, catalysts, ceramic glazes. Then we've also got methoxyacetic acid, so MAA, and it's widely used as solvent in the manufacture of protective coatings. Another phthalate, N-pentyl isopentyl phthalate, and this we're looking as part of the August group of expected date of submissions. We've got 1,2-benzene dicarboxylic acid, dipentyl ester branched and linear, and then diazine 1,2-dicarbomoxide. So the 1,2-benzene dicarboxylic acid is related to phthalates, and it's also used as a plasticizer. DHNUP, it's not to be mistaken with that. It's a slightly different substance with a different CAS number, but both are plasticizers. And this next substance is more commonly known as azodicarbonamide. It's one of the most widely used chemical foaming agents. So we're looking at polyvinyl chloride, polyethylene, polypropylene, ABS resin, and rubber foams. So again, I've taken the time to summarize these for you and some of the industries affected for these intended SVHCs. A summary of everything that was in that table as a more quick reference possibly for your use, or perhaps to pass the information on to other members in your companies. So we've got the further arsenic compounds, the coal tar distillates and residues. So these again are the substances that don't have a current expected date of submission, but I still wanted to look at the industries impacted by those. Then we've got the PFOA and the APFO. I've grouped these common uses by the substances related to each other. So we can see fabric protection, stain repellents, firefighting foam, semiconductor industry. APFO, we're looking at the paper industry, and then the carpets and fabrics. I've included all of the PFCs and summarized their impact there. Then we've got some phthalates. So the multi-industry impact of plasticizers, whether we're looking at carpets, flooring, toys, clothes, wallpapers, water pipes, paints, furniture, perfumes, cosmetics, cables, electronics, and then summarized also the hexaphthalic anhydrides, and we're looking at the electric and electronics industries as well as the semiconductor industry. Then the cyclohexane 1,2-dicarboxylic anhydride, a multi-industry impact, again, was looking at coatings, epoxy resins, solidifying agents, polyester resins, adhesives, and plasticizing agents. Then the diazine 1,2-dicarboxamide, mouth moving faster than my brain. Again, a multi-industry impact, polyvinyl chlorides, polyethylenes, polypropylenes, ABS resins, rubber foams, and there was some mention of food-grade application as a food additive, a flour bleaching agent, and an improving agent, which was definitely a little concerning that there was a reference to this being used in the food industry. MAA, again, protective coatings. It's an intermediate for a plasticizer, which again has a multi-industry impact. Plant protection and pharmaceuticals were also mentioned as having MAA, used in that industry. Cadmium, cadmium sulfide, cadmium oxide. I grouped those together. We're going to look at that next slide for the existing EU restrictions because there are restrictions for colorant, stabilizer, and plating in the EU. But for non-EU, we're looking at the battery industry, pigments, paints, colorants, solder and bearing alloys, and electroplating. So I have taken the existing restrictions on cadmium directly out of the REACH Annex. So I'm not going to go through every single detail of this. This was more for reference. But essentially, these restrictions are very detailed. You can see from point 1, shall not be used to give color to finished articles manufactured from the substances and preparations below. So it can't be used as a colorant in the finished articles manufactured from the substances and preparations below. Then there's paints and that restriction. And then it shall not be used to stabilize the finished articles listed below manufactured from polymers or copolymers of vinyl chloride. And then it goes through to say that paragraph 3 does not apply to finished articles using cadmium-based stabilizers for safety reasons, so there's exemptions. The reason that we're not going into every single detail of this is very specific, very detailed. If you have some cadmium concerns, we'd be more than happy to really look at this and dissect it, but at least you have a reference to work off of, the base. You've got the cadmium restrictions already in existence and are aware that cadmium is also on the Registry of Intentions, and we're looking at a 0.1% weight by weight possibility when it moves to the SVHC list. Again, another surface of this is cadmium plating in this restriction. Shall not be used for cadmium plating metallic articles or components of the articles used in the sector's applications listed below. So we've got A and B here. We've split it up. And then it continues. So as you can see, this is a very detailed restriction, the ins and outs. And because cadmium may not apply to the majority of people, again, I wanted to include it as a reference so that you can see all the elements of the restrictions, the existing restriction, and still understand that it's on the Registry of Intentions moving to the SVHC. And these restrictions only apply in the EU. So your products being manufactured in the U.S. does not necessarily mean that they're going to deal with the EU restrictions. And then in addition, when the cadmium products move on to the SVHC list, you've still got to deal with that restriction anyways, whether there's exemptions under the existing restriction in that annex or not, you're going to have to deal with the SVHC impacts. So how can Ascent help? So a more detailed view of our consulting services. We can manage compliance to ROS, REACH, CLP, other environmental standards, ensuring compliance with regulatory agencies and compliance regulations, reviewing and evaluating the environmental requirements and changes and the impact on your particular company. We can support sourcing and selection, serve as a subject matter expert on regulatory matters, specification and drawing review, obsolescence management, and then of course working with your suppliers on your compliance plan, on your compliance program, and on what corrective actions they would have to take. So this is some further details on those services. And this is an example of specifications and whether you have existing environmental specifications or existing REACH specifications, or whether you simply have an environmental specification and REACH has to be added into it, or whether you have no specifications at all and we need to create those from scratch. Here's an example. Again, this is a common access specification. It's from Belden, and I've reviewed this and talked about a few things that would be added or should be added. The appropriate regulatory reference. It's outdated. It's not dealing with the chemical requirements. It's based solely on the REACH SVHC list. It may be smarter to insert the link to the current list and insert some wording around the fact that suppliers have to stay aware and compliant to the most current list. You can also continue to update it as the SVHC candidate list updates if that's within your resources. It's important to include the CAS numbers and not just list the substances, because depending on naming conventions, the substances on that candidate list may not always be recognized, be it in China, be it in North America. It's easiest to include CAS, and my suggestion is also EC numbers. When you include a term like trace amounts in your specifications, that should be defined. I also advise, of course, that you create and send out some sort of reporting tool to help record the information. When asking, this is related to the declarations that we were talking about, but dealing with these specifications and requirements or adding information to your terms and conditions, to your T's and C's, having a reporting tool will simplify this in order to gather and amalgamate all your data and understand your current status. As a small separate note, the ROS recast also, if you've got ROS in your current specifications or current T's and C's, the ROS recast comes into effect January 2nd of 2013, and that update is required as well. So I've also included a sample supply chain follow-up process. So when designing a compliance plan and compliance program, these are some of the elements that we look at and work with you to develop so that you have a clear follow-up process, and this way that any new members of a team or changing members of a team can quickly be brought up to speed as we develop an entire compliance plan documented and agreed upon between both, with our assistance and agreed upon internally for your company. As I mentioned earlier, creating terms and conditions. So here's an example I talked about, the regulations that need to be met, defining threshold levels and trace amounts and what that needs, dealing with the current candidate list and current ROS regulations, and if you were also adding in, say, China ROS, for example, this is a term and condition example or template that we've used and helped develop in the past, and that's something also that we're more than happy to assist you with. Now, software services, as I mentioned, some sort of data gathering tool. We also have a software offering. We've done a few demos in the past today. Obviously, with the amount of information that we were covering, we didn't include a demo today. But our software helps you automatically gather environmental compliance data. It's a platform for your suppliers to enter their information, whether they have a standard declaration or not. They can enter this. You can generate custom reports and compliance documents. It acts as a platform to allow your internal teams to manage external and internal declarations for your suppliers, but as well as for parts of or components that you create, manufacture internally. It's also an automatic communication tool to inform suppliers of changes to environmental regulations or updates to the new SVHC list. So now we're at the questions part. We've summarized. We're right at 11 a.m. Let me take a quick look through the questions. I'll see if there's any I can answer really quickly. As I've mentioned, this entire webinar, all the slide deck in its entirety will be available. A recording will be available as well, and all of the questions will be answered in an FAQ document, and we'll look to email all of the submitters as well with their separate answer. And that will be coming. Normally everything is out by Friday of this week, so that would be Friday, July 13th. Barring any unforeseen delays, we're normally able to get all information up within the same week. At the latest, I would say the 16th, but likely the 13th, everything should be up and available. So a quick question, when do we need to show compliance to these newly added SVHCs? Well, for the communication, as I said, in your supply chain it's actually immediate. Notification is 6 months, and communication to consumers, so not to actual consumers, is 45 days from a request. So quickly. We've got some discussion on whether the authorization process. So we'll go back quickly to that slide. Let's go back to the authorization process. I'm going to move through these very quickly and review that that authorization, the steps that I had included. So is step 3 the proposed candidate list? So yes, step 3 is when the publication of those dossiers. So yes, that would be the proposed candidate list, and then there's a commenting period given, and you're allowed to comment on that proposed candidate list, and then it's after that comment period ends, then you'll see the SVHCs added to the candidate list. So that's a great question. Are there specific concentration limits for SVHCs that are on the authorization list? No. The 0.1% weight by weight is for communication and then the notification criteria. On the authorization list, unless it's specifically called out, some sort of exemption, there is no concentration limit. The use of that substance at all must be authorized unless it's specifically called out. And it's normally industry by industry. It's not dealing with a specific concentration. Sending us the presentation. So again, as I mentioned, the presentation will be available on our website. We also normally send the presentation out via email to all registered attendees. So you will be receiving that. The FAQ will be available on our webinar site, and the recording will be available. How much does it take to notify and to complete the authorization procedure for SVHCs? Okay, so that's 2 separate steps. Notification is a notification to the ECHA. It's a smaller dossier, and so there is still some time, of course, that it takes, and that's very dependent on the substance and the uses. But again, the cost to notify is nothing. It's simply time to determine whether notification applies. That would actually take more time, determining whether you meet both criteria, than the actual creation of the notification dossier. And then to complete the authorization procedure for SVHC, this is a time-intensive, expensive endeavor. Authorization, those costs and everything, that's a completely offline discussion, and depends on numerous factors, size of company, and such. And then to complete that, it is the authorization procedure, that is really, it's like looking at a registration dossier in terms of time and cost. So that's something you would definitely want to avoid, if possible. So let's see, what else do we have here for questions? All right, so we're looking at 11:05, and the rest of the questions are fairly specific. So what I'll end up doing is answering those in the FAQ document and then in emails as well. So in order to keep everyone to a logical time, I'm going to thank everyone for attending. It's 11:05 a.m. If you have any questions after the webinar, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll be glad to answer those questions offline. We can set up a call as necessary and help you through any situations you might be facing. So thanks very much again, and have a great day. Bye-bye.